some topic that would be relevant to us, and I thought Pope Benedict XVI in the 21st century world would be something that maybe would provoke some thought for us. Pope Benedict was elected on the 19th of April 2005, and when we look at the Holy Father in the 21st century, what we're doing is focusing on really what does a pope do? He's placed there in history. He's the one who works for Christ, and he works for Christ in a unique way that nobody else does. And he does this right here in our history. And what you see when you look through what Pope Benedict is doing is the notion of the Vicarius Christi. Vicarius is the old Latin word for one who does the work of. And so what you have is Benedict doing the work of Christ. And what always strikes me when I look at something that he's written, and I'm working systematically through everything that he says, is that he's done all this before. If you've read his books, you will see those thoughts popping up again and again in the speeches, the encyclicals, the addresses to certain groups. For example, I've heard that he's planning a letter on brotherhood, and he wrote a book on that about 30 years ago. Ideas that appear in Caritas Veritate were first given out in his Introduction to Christianity. And what he's doing is telling us that something that is true stands the test of time. If it's true, it can stand for this century, the next century, and what follows. And theologically, what that means is the divine word is speaking in the church. The divine word is the ultimate truth. And that because it's true, it simply stands. He's also constantly, by doing this, bringing the flock together. He's bringing the flock together with the truth. This unifies the flock if they accept the truth. And so some of them respond to it, and the larger world sees what this truth can mean and what this truth can do. Vatican II says that the Pope is the perpetual and visible principle and foundation of unity, both of the bishops and of the faithful. And what he's doing is using every means at his disposal to make the church one in this new century. One in the truth, one in love, one in the Spirit of God. First and foremost, obviously right at the center of everything that he says and does is Jesus Christ himself. He said to the young people in Germany, he, Christ, who says of himself, I am the light of the world, causes our lives to shine brightly, so that what we've just heard in the gospel comes true. You are the light of the world. It's not our human efforts or the technical progress of our era that brings light into this world. End of quote. This is where the light really is, with Christ, not in technological progress. And obviously this is fundamental. What he's telling us is that the Divine Son has taken on humanity, which means that he has taken on all humanity. And here he is able to show us the fullness of being human. This is what in a lot of Benedict's writing is called the new humanism. It's a sense of humanism based on Christ with the full possibilities of human life rooted in Christ, and it's a wonderful message for the 21st century. He can't do this, of course, without the church. Pope says the church renews the mystery for people of every generation. She shows them God's face, so that, with his blessing, they may walk on the path of peace. End of quote. So the church is really a privileged place in this worldwide search for truth. Peace is the key to humanity having the space to be able to seek the truth. As he said in his Mass for the new evangelization, the people of our time, after the inauspicious season of the totalitarian empires in the 20th century, need to rediscover an overall look at the world and at time, a truly free, peaceful look. End of quote. This idea of this overall look at the world is something about Catholicism that brings us the meaning of the whole. It brings us the meaning of the whole of humanity before God. It brings us the meaning of this world as one human community. This is a very powerful idea. Lying behind all of this is his conviction that given time and space to do it, people will come to the truth. And in fact, this is the basis of his argument for religious tolerance. Not only us being tolerant, but actually demanding of others that they be tolerant of us. And this is ultimately why the Church insists on religious freedom for all, so that everyone may search and continue to search. And in this search, the Church has pride of place. It stands in history as simply a truthful presence. But you can see how scandals and all the rest of it would damage that meaning of a truthful presence. Now, if this is the Church, if this is Christ radiating through the Church, then let's have a look at some of the features of what Benedict has pointed to in the work that he and the Church do. And the first one is the reading the signs of the times. Even before he was elected, he was working on energizing Europe. He was at a speech at Subiaco where he was receiving the St. Benedict Award for the promotion of life and family in 2005. This is just a month before he was elected. He said the following: "If Christianity, on the one hand, has found its most effective form in Europe, it is necessary, on the other hand, to say that in Europe a culture has developed that constitutes the absolutely most radical contradiction, not only of Christianity, but of the religious and moral traditions of humanity." End of quote. And further on in the same speech, he said that the Muslims, who in this regard are often and willingly brought in, do not feel threatened by our Christian moral foundations, but by the cynicism of a secularized culture that denies its own foundations. Neither are our Jewish fellow citizens offended by the reference to the Christian roots of Europe, inasmuch as these roots go back to Mount Sinai. They bear the sign of the voice that made itself heard on the mountain of God, and unite with us in the great fundamental orientations that the Decalogue has given humanity. The same is true for the reference to God. It's not the mention of God that offends those who belong to other religions, but rather the attempt to build the human community absolutely without God. End of quote. So here you have a member of the Curia working for unity by passing on the truth. He has this confident sense, which should be a Catholic sense, of standing over against history, reading the signs of the times, and affirming that only the Church can really read history, because we read it using reason in the light of faith. And that brings me then to the second criterion that we find in Benedict's work: using our reason correctly, something I have a lot of trouble with my students. What he's doing when he does this is continuing the legacy of John Paul II. In other words, facing history reasonably. In Caritas in Veritate, he says, reason always stands in need of being purified by faith. This also holds true for political reason, which must not consider itself omnipotent. For its part, religion always needs to be purified by reason in order to show its authentically human face. Any breach in this dialogue comes only at an enormous price to human development. End of quote. Now, there are all kinds of possibilities and directions we could go in here. But underlying what he's saying is this humanism again. He's saying that humans, to really be human, should use their reason and use it correctly. If we are to operate in a human fashion, we must use our reason. When we're doing this, then we can turn to deal with issues that are even deadly issues. And this brings us to the notorious speech that he gave in Regensburg to the assembled doctors in 2006. He was addressing the issue of violence and religion. And what he does is he sets the role of reason in a wonderfully human historical narrative. Quoting the Holy Father, "The encounter between the biblical message and Greek thought did not happen by chance. The vision of St. Paul, who saw the road to Asia barred, and in a dream saw a Macedonian man plead with him, 'Come over to Macedonia and help us.' This vision can be interpreted as a distillation of the intrinsic necessity of a rapprochement between biblical faith and Greek inquiry." In point of fact, the Holy Father goes on, this rapprochement had been going on for some time. The mysterious name of God, revealed from the burning bush, a name which separates this God from all other divinities with their many names, and simply asserts being, "I am," already presents a challenge to the notion of myth, to which Socrates' attempt to vanquish and transcend myth stands in close analogy. Within the Old Testament, the process which started at the burning bush came to new maturity at the time of the exile, when the God of Israel, and Israel now deprived of its land and worship, was proclaimed as the God of heaven and earth, and described in a simple formula which echoes the words uttered at the burning bush: "I am." When he turns to the Caritas in Veritate, the rapprochement of which he's speaking is to deal with this link between reason and reality. The reality is that God exists, God is the God of existence, and this is the reason that is open to God. But it's also a reason, as he says, that is rooted in protecting and advancing humanity. Now, when he gets to that point, he can then start dealing with the notion of violence. Because if God is who he really is, if our reason is truly open to this God, then we cannot be violent. I'll come back to that point. He also says in Caritas in Veritate, fidelity to man requires fidelity to the truth, which alone is the guarantee of freedom and of the possibility of integral human development. For this reason, the Church searches for truth, proclaims it tirelessly, and recognizes it wherever it is manifested. This mission of truth is something that the Church can never renounce. Her social doctrine is a particular dimension of this proclamation. It is a service to the truth which sets us free. Open to the truth from whichever branch of knowledge it comes, the Church's social doctrine receives it, assembles into a unity the fragments in which it's often found, and mediates it within the constantly changing life patterns of the society of peoples and nations. Caritas in Veritate, the right use of reason. If we are using our reason correctly as open to all of reality, it will embrace, open us to God who is simply the God of existence, the God of truth. Third feature that we find in Benedict's work, attending to humanity. In other words, promoting the real values of being human means attending to history. Not only is the Pope attending to history, you find this throughout all of his work, he's also keeping the category of history before us. He has recognized that we live in a time that has forgotten that, in fact, it has a history. Allied with that is the loss of the historical dimension of human being. So what he's doing is constantly talking to a diminished humanity and saying to them, look, attend to history. See your true selves. See yourselves as God made you. Not through the lens of some politician. History and all of its lessons is one dimension of the full humanity. For example, it showed Blessed John Newman why he was disquieted with Anglicanism. Human beings only grasp the present through the past. Constant references to the past and to the future are essential for us understanding who we are. And this is where the Pope fits in his great encyclical on hope, which refers not only to the future, but how does the future guide me now? Behind all of this, see yourselves as God made you, not the mean creatures produced by consumerism or political parties, or by the struggle for resources. All these forces cut human beings down to the here and now. Of course, this makes human beings much more manageable. But once again, Benedict is pushing for the fullest sense of being human. See yourselves the way God made you. The fullest sense of being human comes out, for example, in that speech that he gave in Regensburg, which I referred to earlier. And he said the following thing. This is the turning point of the whole speech. God does not become more divine when we push him away from us in a sheer, impenetrable voluntarism. Rather, the truly divine God is the God who's revealed himself as Logos, and as Logos has acted and continues to act lovingly on our behalf. Certainly, love, as St. Paul says, he goes on, transcends knowledge and is thereby capable of perceiving more than thought alone. Nonetheless, it continues to be love of the God who is Logos, truth. Consequently, Christian worship is, again to quote Paul, logike latreia, worship in harmony with the eternal Word. And there's everything turns on that one word, harmony. If we are in this world and we are supposed to be in harmony with the God who created us, then we can't possibly be violent people. And that notion of harmony, which our reason brings out, is what he was trying to put forward. The doctors in the audience hall there understood what he was saying, although the newspapers got it wrong. But basically, this sets the right framework for dealing with the question of violence. Another theme, and don't worry, I'm not going to run out of themes for another 10 minutes. Another theme that you find in Benedict's work, living the faith. There is this warm and personal spirituality that runs right through all of his writings, his speeches, every time he has to preach. In his Man in Prayer series of audiences, for example, he even addressed an audience on the prophets. He gave an audience on Elijah. Quoting from that audience, he says, "Worship of an idol, instead of opening the human heart to otherness, to a liberating relationship that permits the person to emerge from the narrow space of his own selfishness, to enter the dimensions of love and of reciprocal giving, shuts the person into an exclusive and desperate circle of self-seeking. You have a whole psychology of idol worship right there in that little audience address, which is like 20 lines long. The self-deception that he was talking about, he goes on to say, is such that in worshiping an idol, people find themselves forced to extreme actions in the vain attempt to subject reality to their own will. So there's a whole spiritual psychology here that can be drawn out of the life of Elijah. And this ties in with something that he says in another place, and that is that in the Old Testament was where man learned how to be human before God. Everything is connected because he's building this idea of this full humanity. Christ has brought it. Let's unpack it so that people can appreciate it and understand it. The last thing I want to say is part of the full sense of the human is education. We have to have education going on. CDU, thank you very much. We have to have education going on to help human beings to be human beings. He said to the teachers and religious in England at St. Mary's University, it means that the life of faith needs to be the driving force behind every activity in the school. That's what a Catholic school is. So that the church's mission may be served effectively, and the young people may discover the joy of entering into Christ's being for others. Then he said to the students, I hope that amongst those of you listening to me today, there are some future saints of the 21st century. What God wants most of all for each of us is that you should become holy. Holy, wholeness, full grasp of what it means to be human. He, that's God, loves you much more than you could ever begin to imagine. He wants the very best for you. And by far the best thing for you is to grow in holiness. So bringing all that together now, what we're finding in Benedict's work as he faces the 21st century is essentially bringing the truth to each situation, bringing grace to each situation. What he's doing is defending reason in a time of unreason. He's defending the nature of God and the nature of men when both realities have been polluted or downright caricatured by ideologies and sheer hatred. He's also speaking where others keep silent. Think of the Chinese church, for example. So that the whole of humanity will know that they are loved infinitely and unconditionally. And let me close with this quotation from Caritas in Veritate. Just as the sacramental love of spouses unites them spiritually in one flesh and makes out of the two a real and relational unity, so in an analogous way, truth unites spirits and causes them to think in unison, attracting them as a unity to itself. End of quote. The shepherd, successor to Peter, is working to bring unity to humankind. And in this, the church has this irreplaceable role, but is to make humankind one. Thank you very much.